Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Jacob Belated here, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I talk about every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, 7 days a week, one episode a day. And today, on the 7th of November 2018, we're starting the season finale for season 14, The Talons of Weng-Chiang, written, of course, by Robert Holmes, and directed by David Maloney, and starring Tom Baker and Louise Jameson. Now, we're starting with part 1 today, but of course, before we really get into the meat of things, I would like to address probably the story's overall issue in that it may be a bit difficult for modern audiences to watch due to an extensive use of Yellowface. One of our big villains, Lee Chang, is a Chinese character, but played by a white man in Yellowface. One of those poor decisions that has not aged well, and I don't even think it was really acceptable at the time. However, that being said, I have decided that is not actually going to affect the score of the story. We're going to sort of ignore it, mainly because the script itself is much more interesting and, oddly enough, much more charitable. There's this moment even in part 1 where Chang says, "Oh, I understand, we all look alike to you," essentially calling the Doctor out for being racist, even though the Doctor isn't racist. The Doctor just recognized, "I saw your face on the poster," which of course was based off of the thing. It's also apparently supposed to be an homage to Fu Manchu, though I don't know about how accurate that homage is, because I don't know about Fu Manchu. That is not a character I am familiar with, and it's not a character that I am, I don't know about the character. That being said, the story itself, it's rather interesting. We're in Victorian London. The Doctor is taking Leela essentially to a music hall. He's trying to continue her education because he believes the education of Leela is very important. And that being said, it's one of those things that the story builds around Leela needing to be educated. Something that I think is really interesting is that that you have this interesting dynamic. There's a point, this amazing shot near the end where the Doctor is stalked by a Chinese person. He throws an axe that misses the Doctor, but he's also killed immediately because Leela has been stalking him from behind. That sort of really shows what sort of character Leela is overall. Just sort of what the character is made of, and the way Louise Jameson plays Leela is always a good time. This first episode also introduces the characters of Henry Gordon, Jago, and Professor George Litefoot. Though they don't meet yet, they won't meet for a long while into the story. Henry Gordon Jago is the owner of the theater, sort of this bumbling, kind of a drunkard. He confronts one of his stagehands who has been terrified of this thing. It's like, "Have you been drinking?" The stagehand says, "No, sir, Mr. Jago, sir." "Well, you better start now." Basically telling him, "Get your ass drunk. We need to get through this. A show must go on," type. Played wonderfully by Christopher Benjamin. Oh, trust me, there's going to be several moments talking about Jago and Lightfoot, because they are just both characters. And Professor Lightfoot is introduced as just this pathologist, completely no nonsense. Sort of like, "Yes, well, I don't know what this is. This, for some reason, it looks like he's been killed by a rodent, but that's not possible." Of course, played by the late, great Trevor Baxter. Something that is really quite sad that Trevor Baxter has passed on, because, of course, Big Finish eventually gave Jago and Lightfoot their own spin-off. More on that later in the episode, in this episode, because I have a lot of things to talk about. Seriously, there's just a lot to go on. You have this interesting idea. You have people disappearing off the streets. A body turns up in the river. There's something to do with a Chinese Tong of a black scorpion. All sort of soaked in this, something stalking the Alhambra Theater at night, all done under the pretense of that everything is so quiet and very, very. And it's on the foggy streets of London. Could it be Jack the Ripper? Nobody quite knows. The entire story is just built around this mystery of that this is where the story is going. That we have all these characters and they're interacting in a variety of different ways. They are playing to their strengths. You have everyone. No one can quite be trusted because who's of the things that go bump in the night. And it's a very, very good story. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the Talons of Weng-Chiang Part 1. It is amazing. And then you have, it ends with the Doctor and Leela going down into the sewer and finding like this giant rat. And at least in this episode, the rat looks pretty good. I won't even hold the effects against it because they do enough low lighting to avoid the fact that quite some of the effects may not have aged very well. Just because we have been after a while. We are a long time. We are like 40 years I think out from where the story was aired. So I'm going to give the Talons of Weng-Chiang Part 1 a perfect 10 out of 10. Alright, it is the 7th of November 2018, and I just finished watching Part 2 of the Talons of Weng-Chiang. And Part 2 of the Talons of Weng-Chiang is just as good as the first part, mainly because, well, it's an episode that, it's a very interesting episode in the fact that it goes on quite a bit and deepens the mystery. Obviously, it confirms that Chiang is a villain, but it has the idea that, the first part hinted that he might not be working alone, and this sort of confirms that he doesn't. There's this masked figure, oddly enough, sort of a la the Phantom of the Opera, living in the sewers underneath the Opera Theatre, and abducting these pretty women who, essentially, I guess he kind of just, he there's a suggestion that he eats them. Again, like I talked about in my previous video about the foe from the future, that's sort of a similar idea. That's one of those plot threads of, like, eating people, after some sort of, going through time. Like, this story this Weng-Chiang character, as he is called here, from the 51st century, and they're meant to be time agents. Some stuff that was actually going to be appropriated by the new series to really, expand the idea of time travel, the idea does that get put forward later on in the story. But in this part, I really want to focus on quite a few of the characters, because this is a very, very character-driven story. In this episode, very early on, the Doctor and Leela just run to that's the resolution to the cliffhanger, which, it works. They're in the sewer, so let's just run out of the sewer. Avoid the giant rat. The weirdly giant rat. And go up, where Leela eventually gives him the idea that, it's guarding something. It's trying to keep people away, which, makes sense, because if it, bodies turn up, people see a giant rat in the sewer, no one's going to think they're sane, no one's going to want to go down in the sewer to check, because what are you going to do against a giant rat? Just, shoot it? It's a giant rat. What do you expect to do? Which is one of those, it's a very, very interesting, ideas. Like, you have the, giant rat guarding the sewers, and, they tell Leela to, do it, to let it die. So then, let me actually focus on Henry Gordon Jago, who, is, again, still a larger-than-life character. He famously says, when asked if he's been under the influence of hypnosis, he says, I'm as strong as the Rock of Gibraltar. And then the Doctor just hypnotizes him earlier on, because, the Doctor eventually leaves the group. Part of this episode, the cliffhanger only happens because the Doctor has left, Professor Litefoot and Leela alone. He goes to investigate the theater, and, Henry Gordon Jago, who we see get hypnotized by Chiang to basically not remember any of the weird stuff. Jago realized that there was blood coming down the ventriloquist dummy, that was it not really a dummy? What was it? That's very weird. It should be a dummy. This should not be something that could kill people. Of course, the idea, and then, of course, that's what actually sort of sets up the audience's thought for, the cliffhanger, that, Chiang is hiding something with the dummy, as well as being underneath, because, the big cliffhanger for Part 2 is at Lightfoot's house, where the where Professor Litefoot and Leela go back to, and there are a couple of scenes there, but the cliffhanger itself is Lightfoot goes out to shoot some people who he thinks are stalking who are trespassing, which is very, very sensible and gentlemanly. Leela having her knife. Mr. Sin, the dummy, walks in with a knife and just threatens to stab Leela with a knife, which is a very threatening cliffhanger. Like, it's very scary. Like, this is a ventriloquist dummy. Like, what are you expecting? This shouldn't be alive. It's a dummy. It's not an actual person under there. But of course, it is alive. That's part of the story. And it's one of those really, really good parts of the story, if I do say so myself. It's, like, really clever, playing with the idea that, Chang may be a good magician, but he's not a good ventriloquist at all. No, the dummy is speaking itself, which is quite interesting, because it walks and it talks. That being said, you also have some really, really good character moments. Again, you have all the stuff with Jago and the Doctor. The Doctor basically comes to Jago's theater, gives this whole audition act, like, he just does a standard, produces flowers from nowhere, pulls Jago's handkerchiefs, takes 2 empty pans, puts them together, poof, a dove, hypnotism, and he says he can play the trumpet voluntary on a bowl of live goldfish, which is, I kind of want to see what that would sound like. That sounds quite interesting and quite like a funny sort of thing. And the Doctor then investigates the theater. Like, they see an apparition, that it's actually an apparition. It's a hologram. The Doctor realizes that there are passages underneath the theater that lead places. Like, oh, what's this? It shouldn't be there. It's something that isn't quite right with the world. Nothing is good. Coming around this theater. Like, this isn't a very very safe theater. It's very, very, and weird things are going on here. You have the amazing sequence where our Weng-Chiang just chases the Doctor throughout the theater. He eventually makes it out, but it's a really well choreographed sequence. Very much reminiscent of Phantom of the Opera, the book, and the famous, I believe it's mostly doing the Lon Chaney film. But also you have some really good moments between Leela and Professor Lightfoot. Of course, you have the whole idea that, Leela is a savage. So you have this amazing thing where, instead of, getting a plate and, she just picks up a leg of, like, a chunk of meat and starts eating it. It's like, oh, would you like a knife and fork? She takes a knife. Oh, this is a good knife. And then Professor Lightfoot, being the Victorian gentleman that he is, just sort of joins her. And it's little moments like that really do make this episode shine. Like, you really should, like, look for this episode. It is really solid. We are only a third of the way into the story. It's a very, very, charismatic. We have some fun characters, and just fun character interactions. And, as we are getting closer to an explanation of what actually is going on, what our villain actually is. We know he's something from the future. He's avoiding something called time agents. We don't know who he is, but then he's looking for, like, a cabinet of some sort that is apparently in the hands of an infidel. So it's a really, really good episode. So I'm going to give The Talons of Weng-Chiang Part 2 another 10 out of 10. Alright, it is the 12th of November 2018. I do apologize for the gaps in recording. Life got in the way. But we are watching Talons of Weng-Chiang Part 3. And Part 3 of The Talons of Weng-Chiang continues to be an excellent example of what Doctor Who does very, very well. And what Robert Holmes does with Doctor Who, that's very, very well. And this creates really a lot of interesting characters and extremely memorable moments, even if they don't feature very often in the episode. Let's be honest. One, you have Mr. Sin. So you have Leela going, which causes Leela to jump out the window. Yeah, Leela just jumps out the window and then realizing Mr. Sin was the dummy from the theater. She realizes that, hey, if I go back to the theater, then I should be able to figure out what goes on. And she does. She finds Li Chang working for his master Weng-Chiang with the gravelly and over-the-top voice played by Michael Spice, the same guy who voiced Morbius back in The Brains of Morbius. Basically, he's the guy you want to get if you want that sort of raspy, insane person voice. And he gives a good portrayal of Weng-Chiang. He gives a very, very interesting, nuanced sort of, like, I must have my life, the life force energy. I must feed. Basically, Chang goes out and steals a prostitute coming home from her nightly shift. It's never explicitly said that she's a prostitute, but the way she acts is stereotypical Victorian coding for prostitute. Like, she just wants a cup of rosy and to put her legs up by the fire, in one of those sort of Cockneyish accents. If that went a bit Irish there, I do apologize. I'm not good with accents. But, you have this little character who's just there for a few scenes. She literally gets saved. She gets saved by Leela and, shoved away, and then found by Casey the next morning, all confused, and then gets terrified of the poster of Chang and then runs off. And then that's where we get, like, our single scene with Henry Gordon Jago for the episode, where Jago is like, well, you see, Casey, there was a detective from Scotland Yard, an amateur investigator coming to, help proceedings. I know things because I am Henry Gordon Jago. Christopher Benjamin is a delight. He's only in the episode for that single scene, but that scene is just such a delight. Like, he exudes this this charm of, like, yes, well, you see, I am Henry Gordon Jago, and I am the very, very, I am a theatrical person, and Casey's just sort of, like, done with his shit, and it's an amazing sort of just back and forth. It's a little scene like that really, really do make the episode enjoyable. You also have some really, really unsettling scenes. Like, you have Chang finding people. He also finds, like, one of the ladies who clean up the theater at night in this. It's an odd sequence, and that's kind of intentional. You hear this laughter, and it almost sort of is trying to signal to the audience that Chang might be going insane. And of course, I've seen the story before, so I know where Chang ends up at the end. And it's a really nice foreshadowing of that. Like, here's the voices. Oh, it just turns out to be these ladies cleaning up the theater. So he abducts one and just brings one down to his master. And basically, they have, like, this time distillation chamber. Also, Louise Jameson as Leela is just amazing in the episode overall. She's the one being proactive and finding the villain and fighting the villain. Like, this is Leela's big, I'm standing up for what I believe in and what is right, and virtuous, and, I'm the doctor's companion. I'm here to help. That's sort of what she is. She's a savage, but she knows, she knows enough, and she knows things enough that she's like, hey, I don't actually have to give in to savagery, but I'm more a warrior than savage. Like, I think the term savage doesn't necessarily apply to Leela, because part of the story in general is just trying to show that, she can fit in with Victorian customs. She understands people. She just has an extreme code of honor brought up by her tribal upbringing. And that's a very interesting portrayal and a very interesting message to push in the 1970s. And something that I think this story is probably one of the only few of the ones that really get it done well. I mean, this and probably the Sunmakers, and of course, at least for television stories. Now, in Big Finish, they run with this theme, but this is where the theme sort of originates. It's this, and then I guess the previous two stories, where you really understand that she's not dumb. She's just, from a different cultural perspective. And that's really what makes the character work, just on television, is that she has that differing cultural perspective. She isn't your standard Doctor Who companion from modern day Earth, young lady from modern day Earth. She is from the far future, but also kind of a primitive, and it's really well written. I really enjoy what Robert Holmes does with the character. That being said, it is essentially the it's essentially Leela who goes around. Like, the Doctor and Litefoot are almost in their own, is almost the B plot in the episode, and I actually really enjoy that. It gets the Doctor. Trevor Baxter as George Litefoot is great, and the Doctor has this amazing line of, it's like, you've been up all night? Yes, sleep is for tortoises. That's just a good line, and my terrible Tom Baker impression. I can't impersonate Tom Baker, because he's Tom Baker. And honestly, even the rat, even though a lot of people will rag on the rat, I'm going to give the defense of It probably looked decent for its time. Like, it looks fine. It looks a bit fake, but it's not that bad. It's 1977. It's pretty good, and intersplicing with real rat footage does help. And, of course, the low lighting of the scene. I mean, you really would have to turn up the brightness, it seems, to get the rat cliffhanger to work. So I'm actually going to hold the rat against it, because it's not bad. The rat is excellent, and the rat has really good implications of, sort of what Weng-Chiang is doing. We still don't have... Also, you have this mystery of, like, this Chinese puzzle box and of, like, that contains future technology. And it's that, like, Lightfoot could never get open because he was brought up in China. We get a lot of depth into who George Lightfoot is in this episode. And that is actually really, really fascinating. We get his history, that he was brought up in China. This puzzle box was a gift from his father. He hunted elephants. Oh, the doctor brandishes a gun in this episode. He doesn't fire it because he's the doctor, but he still brandishes it, and that's also just a powerful moment. Like, he's got a gun, he's packing heat, he's ready to get things going. He wants to defeat the villain. We're only halfway through the story, and it's really well written. Robert Holmes is just on part, and as this is the last real produced story by Philip Hinchcliffe, it's good to be going out on such a high note. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to give The Talons of Weng-Chiang Part 3 another 10 out of 10. All right, it is the 13th of November, 2018, and I just finished watching Part 4 of The Talons of Weng-Chiang. And Part 4 of The Talons of Weng-Chiang could accurately be described as the episode with the biggest theater segment. This is sort of where the episode climaxes and decides to turn into a slightly different direction, with Li Sen-Chang sort of taking a backseat as the villain, as he has essentially disgraced his Lord Weng-Chiang by the end of this episode. And eventually, the episode ends with him going to meet his ancestors in the sewers, aka he's going to the sewers to get himself killed by the giant rat. So this isn't actually the end of Li Sen-Chang as we know him. He does, in fact, still get to have a decent send-off later on. This episode is pretty much characterized by the middle theater segments, and I will talk about that in length in a minute. But first, I'd like to discuss the character of Leela and sort of some of her developments as well, because she's been a really good character. This gets her out of her ruined dress and into another nice-looking Victorian dress. This time, actually, much more feminine than the sort of, like, page boy-ish outfit, I think. I can't quite tell what her first outfit was. It looks more like... It looked kind of like a woman's thing, but it also looked almost like it would be sort of a bit ambiguous as to, like, what gender would wear that dress. And her costuming is great. Like, she really has started to get into, like, integrate into Victorian society, but also, doesn't actually lose herself in Victorian society. She's still Leela. She still has these questions about the world out there in society, and like, well, why is this done? This is silly. And all these things are actually very well done and well performed by Louise Jameson. But oddly enough, episode 4 is one where episode 3 was very much an episode for Professor Lightfoot to shine. Episode 4 is one where Henry Gordon, Jago, gets to shine, as we spend most of the time at the theater. Like, he even gets himself almost caught by Chang. Yes, remember, last night I do remember we were discussing a new contract, but remind me, the details were hazy. Was it a very fair contract? Most agreeable, I believe. These little interactions like that between the two characters are hilarious. And it's sort of, you have Jago, who is kind of a coward, not made of the strongest stuff. His bravery is brought out by the people, by having brave people around him, and he's a very interesting character like that. Like, he's much there for the Doctor, and to help the Doctor, but it's quite interesting in that he also thinks, well, the Doctor being with Scotland Yard, as I think, would have people posted in the audience. He's trying to be discreet when he comes to visit him in the box of the theater in what is a hilarious scene. Like, there's this amazing little exchange between them where it's like he's hiding from almost behind them, like, yes, you don't actually see me, no one can see me, I'm totally being sneaky. But it's shot in this way, and it's very intentional from David Maloney. David Maloney is an amazing director. I believe this is actually his last directorial story for Doctor Who, which is kind of a shame. Also, I think it's one of probably his best works on Who. Overall, like, this shot, it's supposed to be like, yeah, everyone can see Jago if they're looking up. Like, he is very much, not actually hiding in any way from people when he's doing his whole, yes, I'm behind you, Doctor, and I am, helping you. There's also the sequence with Chang's act. We see Chang's act. He throws a pack of cards up to the Doctor and shoots with our magic bullet, one bullet hole through a card, which is a lovely, it's really good stage magic. And it's actually really tense because the audience knows that Chang wants to kill the Doctor. What's quite funny is that then they do this whole like one of those canons where they stab a bunch of swords, like death of 1,000 stabs. And that's the climax of the act, only because, well, Casey, the stagehand, this lovable guy who is, I haven't really talked too much about, he gets stabbed several times and dies. Like, he's dead. He gets died on stage. They go turn down the curtain, and that's when we sort of scramble to the finish, where Jago, the Doctor, and Leela go down into Weng-Chiang's lair. Chang disappears while Weng-Chiang and Mr. Sin are off stealing the cabinet from Professor Litefoot's house, who is then, knocked out and indisposed by the end of part 4 in a really sinister cliffhanger. It's almost like, hey, the villains have won. That's our part 4 cliffhanger. The villains have seemed to have won. It's not everyone's in peril. Well, it isn't everyone's in peril because the villains have won, but it's not immediate peril. It's like there's still possibly a chance, but like the villains now have the upper hand, and that is an excellently a very well executed cliffhanger. I honestly love, sort of what the cliffhanger does with it. Like it makes it's a very, 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 very well executed and very interestingly shot cliffhanger. Oddly enough, the scene with Jago in the lair underneath the theater is like, ooh, come and see the Phantom's lair. I can charge a bob. This should be great for business. It's this hilarious. It's like, yes, I do care, but I also need the money. He's a greedy character, but he's not like greed as a vice. It's almost like greed as a comedic asset to the character, something that I think is very, very interesting overall for Jago. All that being said, it's really elements like this that really make part 4 work as an episode. So I'm going to give the Talons of Weng-Chiang part 4 another 10 out of 10. All right, it is the 14th of November 2018, and I just finished watching part 5 of the Talons of Weng-Chiang. And part 5 of the Talons of Weng-Chiang is the episode that contains the pivotal moment, the moment that I used as the sort of screenshot we're using for this episode. The moment that Jago and Litefoot actually meet, and we get the beginnings of what turns out to be a beautiful friendship. More on that in my next video. Because Jago and Litefoot meeting essentially allows what's essentially probably going to be is going to be one of the finest examples of a Robert Holmes double act, which is I've explained this before, but this is when you have two characters written by Robert Holmes that just sort of are together, and they sort of play off each other in such a way that it makes them memorable more than they would be if they were apart. There's a reason Big Finish took Jago and Litefoot and gave them 13 series, 13 box sets of audio dramas, plus appearances in other Doctor Who stories. These characters aren't going away, and heck, they were even intended to be a spin-off, right with the character, right after this story was released. It was over 40 years ago now. You have this episode where they have met each other, and they have some very, very good, very, very good episodes together. There's these great moments. When Jago meets Litefoot, he automatically thinks, oh, you must be the servant, because, Litefoot is wearing his whole pathology gear, and he's wearing, like, yes, I am essentially I'm wearing something that's not the usual, something usual, like, not like I'm, a professor. He's a guy wearing, his work stuff. He's doing work for the Doctor, and they both immediately sort of hit it off as friends. And you know what? It's a great dynamic, a really, really solid friendship overall. And they get along very, very well. They have a lot of fun together. They immediately go in to investigate, the laundry where Magnus Greel essentially is being, taking his, being doing his evil plans. That this is the area where that happens, and it's a very, very interesting episode. It's a really, really fun episode. Like, it ends with we actually get to see what's underneath Weng-Chiang's face. We also see the death of Chang. Like, he goes to an opioid den and essentially drowns his sorrows and dies. And it's a very touching scene, and it also a little bit difficult to watch in one of those ways. Like, it's a really, really sad sort of scene. Like, you feel really, really bad for this character. Like, you've got the the you've got the big monster reveal, sort of in a mimicry of Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera, with Leela in the dress pulling off the mask to see this deformed face, and it's a really nice prosthetic mask for the character. It's a really solid a really solid character piece. Like, you have a good explanation for the character is, and it's really all of the things like this. Really, when Jago and Litefoot get together, you have the the story. You have the story really going really well. Yeah. You have them. Everything is set. This episode is set up for the big finale, and we're ready for the big finale. You have the characters meeting. You have everything getting ready to just figure out that who Weng-Chiang actually is. We figure out that Mr. Sin is something called a peking homunculus, which is basically this little robot with the brain of a pig that went insane, which kind of makes him all the more creepy after this. Like, they really try to up the creep factor with Mr. Sin as as a character. It's a very it's a very, very good idea. It's very, very creepy too. So much so, it really makes you feel like this is a real monster here. So overall, I'm going to give the Talons of Weng-Chiang Part 5 another 10 out of 10, because even though we are just setting up for the finale, but it's a really good setup for the finale. Alright, it is the 15th of November 2018. Forgive me if I sound a little odd, I'm just getting a cold. Hopefully it'll be gone soon, and it won't affect too many things. But Part 6 of the Talons of Weng-Chiang is what I watched today, and it is an amazing conclusion to the story. Now that Chang's out of the way, you really get to see how Magnus Greel, who is Weng-Chiang, actually is as a villain. And he is dastardly. You also get to see this side to Mr. Sin that is totally diabolical, completely evil, and utterly ruthless. Like, there's this giant dragon statue that shoots lasers from its eyes that was salvaged from the future in the villain's lair, because of course there is. This is, again, we're not necessarily going for realism here, we're going for spectacle ending, and as a spectacle ending, it does a really, really good job. But it also does a really, really good job of taking care of our characters and making sure that our characters get a good satisfying conclusion. So you have the dragon statue, and Mr. Sin basically is like, I'm just going to shoot everyone in sight, because they won't give my master back the thing. And honestly, it's only when they push Greel into his own thing that he dies. He crumbles to dust because, well, he's lost, he's not lost the will to live, but he has lost, essentially, his cellular, makeup. He is decomposed. He has ceased to be. It's actually quite really good. And then the Doctor just sort of drop kicks Mr. Sin by the end and rips out his little brain. It turns, because they obviously had already established that Mr. Sin was this Peking homunculus with the brain of a pig, which is a really, really good sort of thing, sort of an idea. That's really fun. But also, Magnus Greel is really interesting. He's from the 51st century. He thinks the Doctor and Leela are time agents sent back to get him. He was part of these Sigma experiments, basically to create a crude form of time travel. He, did enough work. He's sort of the foe from the future. Again, and his cellular makeup was, messed about by the time vortex. Messed about, of course, being a technical term. And that's why his face is all melty, and that's why he needs to take the energy out of, the young women off the streets of London, which is, a really, really creepy, yet really, but really well done sort of, I don't want to say twist, but just sort of spin on things. It does a really, really good job of, being really creepy. Michael Spice plays Weng-Chiang very, very well, and Magnus Greel as a character is very interesting. He's sort of this, he's a very ambitious villain. He really wants to see his plans succeed because he wants to, take over his own time. He wants to leave this time, and oddly enough, he doesn't actually win. The Doctor, of course, wins. You also have Jago and Litefoot really getting the start of their friendship here, being solidified. Like, a lot of this is the Doctor, Jago, and Litefoot interacting while Leela is not as so much captured, but is just sort of off stage for quite a bit. I remember this amazing thing where Litefoot tries to teach Leela about tea, which is hilarious. And then they eat muffins at the very end, and everything's very happy. Like, the final scene is really, really touching. And just really well written. Like, the entire episode, it's really nice. A very nice ending is probably the best way that I could describe it. Of course, this is the last episode also to be produced by Philip Hinchcliffe, with Graham Williams taking over in the next season, because this is the end of season 14 on television with this episode, and it's a very fitting end. You have Leela and the Doctor going off, Leela leaving smarter than she came, the Doctor leaving with the day being saved, and everything being as it should be. This isn't a bad ending. The key has been smashed up. The Doctor smashes up, so no one can mess with it. And Jago and Litefoot are off to have live their own lives. So, that being said, I'm going to give the Talons of Weng-Chiang Part 6 another perfect 10 out of 10. That being said, we average up the 6 scores of this episode to give the Talons of Weng-Chiang a final score of 10 out of 10. Thank everybody for watching this installment of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, as always. And next time, the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon is going on a bit of a hiatus, but this is not going to be like the hiatus back in August where we didn't have videos. No. This time we are going to be taking our first look at some spin-offs and sidesteps, starting with the backdoor pilot to the Big Finish spin-off Jago and Litefoot with Doctor Who, The Mahogany Murderers.